Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. I always have to remember to pretend I'm Taylor Swift and hold it right up to my mouth. So I'm going to introduce our forum speaker this morning, and I want to start by saying, have you ever had the experience of you sort of never heard of someone and then within like 2 days, 3 people tell you about them? Well, that's what happened with Chris Palmer. Several friends of mine said, oh, because they know I'm interested in end-of-life issues and so forth. They said, you got to meet him. So we did. And Chris Palmer is what he calls himself, and he definitely is an end-of-life activist. Now, that might sound like an oxymoron. Think about it. End-of-life activist. But that's in fact what he is, and that's the field that both of us are passionate about. We all die. There's nothing we can do about that, but there are ways that we can protect our quality of life right up to the very end. And it's something that needs conversation, it needs learning information, talking to people, and he has written, in my view, and I've read mostly all the books that are out there on end of life, Barbara Coombs Lee, my own book, various other books. It's called Achieving a Good Death, and in one book, he has everything from the initial conversations you need to have about your end of life to all the different various forms of burial available now and everything in between. And it's short chapters, and it's practical, and it's clear, and it's accessible. And it's not overly philosophical. It's everything you, and particularly your family. And sometimes it's hard to get our children, if they're in their like 40s and 50s, oh, we don't want you to die. Oh, we don't want to talk about death. This is a book that can help you get into conversations with him, and Chris can tell you about it much better than I can. So please welcome Chris Palmer.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Susan. I know I have lots of lovely friends in the audience here. This is so nice. Reed Detchin, Jerry, where's Barbara Brown? She was here, and Karen and John Burgess, and so thank you all, and I know others of you. So thank you all so much for coming this morning. So Susan, thank you for that lovely introduction. Okay, so I've written this book, and this book contains lots of information, as Susan just said. And I was trying to think, what could I say this morning that would be useful? Because I don't want to repeat the whole book, you know. So what I'm going to do is I've picked out, fairly randomly, I've picked out 3 topics. And I'm going to talk a little about them, and after each one, I'm going to take questions. So start thinking of questions you'd like to ask me. You can ask me anything about death and dying. So I picked out ethical wills, hospice, and green burials. Just 3 topics from the book. But some of you may be thinking, okay, the book is called Achieving a Good Death, and you may be wondering immediately, what is a good death? So let me deal with that very quickly. A good death is what the dying person wants. So it's not really for me to say this is a good death and everybody should have the same death. No, some people will want to have medical interventions right up to the end of the life. They will say to their doctors, keep me alive, prolong my life as long as you can. And others will say if they have unwavering Catholic beliefs, may say they want to there's suffering, there's redemption in suffering, and let me just go through whatever goes through. And others will say, look, don't over-medicalize me. Give me a peaceful death. So everybody will have their own view of what is a good death. So I'm going to tell you not what is a good death, but what is a good death for me. A good death for me. A good death for me is to be surrounded by my family, to be not in unbearable pain, to be comfortable as possible, to have as few regrets as possible. No, it's impossible to have no regrets. We're all human. We're going to have regrets, but have as few regrets as possible, which means, of course, living well in the first place. So living well. I've had a whole chapter in the book on living well to die well, because how we live has a big impact on how we die. And then you will ideally, a good death for me would be lots of expressions of thank yous, and it's been it's been incredible to be with you, and thank you for what you've done for me. And perhaps for some people, reconciliations, where you say, I'm sorry I did that, I regret it, I wish I had been not such a fierce dad when you were younger, and I'm very sorry about that. So there may be apologies where you say sorry. So a chance to say thank you, I'm sorry, and I'm going to miss you, and in talking to the person who's dying, saying to them, we are going to be okay. We're going to be okay, and you can go. It's okay to go. So there are lots of things go into what is a good death. Okay. And you may want to ask me more questions about that, and I'll stop frequently for questions. But I'm going to. Anybody have an immediate question? Anybody have an immediate question about anything? Yeah. Oh my gosh, Karen.
What does your family think about this?
Oh, this. Okay, so I'll repeat it. So Karen Burgess said to me, what does my family think about this? Well, you mean besides Gail getting sick of me talking about end-of-life issues, you mean what do they think about what? About my views of how... Oh, well, they like... I mean, I've written extensively about what I want at the end of life, and you can find those in the appendices in the book. Some of you may want to use those as templates. But generally, my family is, I think, like most people, a little puzzled why I'm so fascinated by end-of-life issues and why I think it's important. But they're coming around, and I think more and more they realize, like most people, eventually do realize that thinking about death and dying and how you want to die and how you achieve a good death are important goals to have. Any follow-up question? Okay, and someone had a hand up here. Yes. Hi. What's your name?
I'm Karen also.
Okay, Karen also. Go ahead.
Well, Karen Abrams. What got you interested in this topic?
Okay, so the question is, what got me interested in this topic? What got me interested in this topic was being scared. Scared is not strong enough, was being petrified. I'm 77. I realized when I got into my 60s that I could begin to see the end, and I felt really petrified, both of dying and of death. Afraid of death because you give up all your relationships, all your projects, everything is gone. And then dying because of all the things that can go wrong with dying: the pain, the constipation, the delirious, the agitation, all the having bed sores. I mean, it's an atrocious time. It can be, not always, it can be a terrible time. Some of you may have seen Downton Abbey and seen the Margie Smith. Remember that scene where she died? Well, how ridiculous was that? I mean, dramatically it worked, but biologically, is it nonsense? People don't die like that. They crack a joke 10 seconds before they die, and then they just got tied off. Her mouth was closed and so on. No, life, dying is smelly, undignified, and a lot can go wrong. So it's best to realize it and deal with it ahead of time. So Karen, how I got interested was because I was scared. I decided that being scared was not a good place to be. So I decided to confront it. To study it, to learn about it, so that's how I became interested in it, because I was afraid and no longer wanted to be afraid. Good. Any other questions before we go on? This is great. So think of questions. Any questions you have, anything to do with end of life or aging. Okay, so let me just talk about ethical wills. The first I just picked up randomly this subject. I deal with it. I got a whole chapter of it. I teach in the book how to write an ethical will. What is an ethical will? Okay, so what happened? COVID, March 2020. And what I decided to do then was to write what I call toast letters to friends. So I wrote one to my wife, Gail, to my 3 daughters, to close friends. I wrote about 60 of them. These were 4, 5, 6-page letters in which I expressed my love for them, thanked them for what they'd done for me, told them how much they were, how precious they were, how I treasured their friendship and so on. And I realized when I was doing this that I was in fact writing an ethical will. Because an ethical will is a letter, also called legacy letters, by the way. An ethical will is a letter you write to your loved ones, to your survivors, to your nephews, nieces, children, and so on, where you describe what you love about them, what your values are, what their values are, how much they've meant to you. Maybe tell some stories of shared experiences, things like this. So an ethical will is a way of revealing what is deep in your heart, and it relates to having a good death. Because if you die without doing one, then you can lie on your deathbed thinking, "Oh my gosh, my life really isn't complete yet because I haven't yet told my daughters or my children or my nephew or whoever, your survivors, how much they mean to me." So it's a very important thing to do, ethical will. So I encourage all of you to do one. In the book, I give a whole chapter to it, and I describe how to do it. It's a wonderful thing to do. Let me pause for questions on ethical wills or anything. Any questions on anything about death and dying? Yes. Yeah. This is redaction, everybody.
One thing that hasn't been said yet, Chris might come across as somebody who wants to sell a lot of books. Chris is actually giving all the proceeds from this book to American University, to the program he worked with there. So there's no profit motive involved here. This is just a labor of love.
Yeah, that's very nice. Thank you very much. That's true. All the proceeds from my books, all 10 of my books, they all go to fund a scholarship that my wife and I have set up at AU, where I used to teach. I taught there for 14 years. Yes.
Will sounds like a legal thing. It doesn't have any legal status, though.
That's a very good question. John, thank you so much for asking that question. Yes, so there are all kinds of wills. There are legal wills, which we're very familiar with. Very important not to die intestate, have a very legal will, and crucially important. But there's also an ethical will that I've just been talking about, which is a letter to your loved ones, telling them how much you love them, what they mean to you, what you hope they will do with their lives, and so on. Then there's a dying will, which is an addendum to your advance directive, which tells your healthcare agent and your loved ones what you want to have done at the end of life. I want to have my lips moistened. I'd love to have a view out of the window to look at trees. Please don't send somebody in to proselytize me and try and convert me to Christianity. I don't want to do that. You lay out what you describe what you want, and that's a dying will. A death will, another type of will. A death will describes what you want in terms of body disposition, what you want to have after, what you want to have if you want a funeral, a memorial service, what might be in your memorial service, and so on. So there are different kinds of wills. They're all very important, but the only one with any legal standing is the legal will, about what happens to your possessions and money and so on. Very good. Thanks for the question, John. Anybody else have a question? Oh, yes, please.
Just a comment. My husband, who passed away last year, started the practice of always ending a conversation with our children and relatives with "love you," which we continue. And my daughter's Scottish partner once remarked on this, and she says, "Well, when do you tell your mom and your dad and everybody that you love them?" He said, "At the funeral." Okay. So I recommend early.
Yes. Thank you so much for that story. It's funny. Now, all of us are familiar with that feeling. You go to someone's funeral or memorial service, and you come out and you say, "Gosh, I never knew that about them," or you say, "I wish I'd known that about them," or you say, "Gosh, all those wonderful things. Why didn't we say them to the dead person before they died?" So very important. That's why I recommend ethical will, because it's a way of telling people you love them early on and not leaving it to the last moment when it can be too late. Yes, I want to repeat myself, which is to say that if you die on your deathbed, having completed these conversations, to say thank you, to say I'm sorry, to say goodbye, I'm going to miss you, you've meant everything to me, we will continue teaching our children the values you've taught, things like this. If you keep on saying that, if you do this early on, then you can die just a little more at peace. This is the whole theme of my book, Achieving a Good Death, or Ways to Achieve a Good Death. Yes.
Kay Tatum, when are the letters delivered?
Okay. Such such a good question. When are the letters delivered? They can be put in an envelope and delivered after you die, but what I recommend is you share it with them right away. This is what I do with my toast letters. Oh, by the way, I should have explained. The reason I call them toast letters is because for a little levity, I put a picture, an image of a piece of toast in the letter, because I was toasting them, and I had a silly little joke. Okay, But I deliver them, I recommend delivering them right away. In fact, what I recommend, something I learned from Martin Seligman, the positive psychologist, is to go to the person in person and read it aloud, slowly. It's a wonderful bonding thing to do, you know, and enriches relationships unbelievably. Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah.
So to add to what she's asked, I wrote my mother's and father's and my brother's obituaries. And my mother's and father's after they had passed, but my brother was dying, and I asked him if I could write it. And he said yes. So I wrote his obituary and worked on it, and then gave it to him to approve. And so this was, and now I have it, a tab on my computer that I can click on that and bring it up. Because when I read that, I know that he knew how much I loved him, and so I can share that now.
Yeah, lovely. That is lovely. And you said obituary, but it almost sounds like a eulogy you were talking about. But either one, and I do encourage in the book. You'll find I do encourage people to when they're to do their own obituaries and eulogies. I mean, help the people who survive you. I mean, one of the loving things a dying person or a person who will die, which is all of us, can do for their survivors, for their children, nephews, whatever, is to provide information. For, it's after someone dies, it's a total pain if you don't know what they want. But if someone dies and you can go to a big folder and find notes on obituary, notes on the eulogy thing, it's very, very notes on what they want, how their body to be disposed of. It's very, very helpful. This is all about looking after other people, taking care of other people's concerns. This is what this book is all about. Okay, so let me go on quickly to, that was ethical wills, hospice. So you will know about hospice. You have to be 6 months. You have to be, a doctor has to say you have to be 6 months of dying. I serve on the board of Montgomery Hospice, and I'm a vice chair of the board, and I'm a hospice volunteer. I expect some of you are hospice volunteers too. It's a lovely thing to do. So hospice is not giving up. Hospice is giving you high quality of life until you die. It's about living, not dying. Anybody have a question about hospice? It's a wonderful thing. Best to go to a non-profit hospice than a for-profit hospice. That isn't a golden rule, but most non-profit hospitals are better. They also offer non-pharmacological things like pet therapy, aromatherapy, music therapy, and things like this, which are very helpful and funded by philanthropic dollars. So yes, John Burgess, everybody. Former distinguished writer for the Washington Post.
Okay. I would guess that most people want the kind of death that you just described for yourself, surrounded by family and not artificially prolonged with machinery. What I've always wondered about the documents that lay that out is we write them well in advance of death, and then when death is staring us in the face, how many of us are really willing to say, well, I'm going to let myself go. I don't want that treatment that might give me 3 more months. And where is the compromise between the ideal and the reality?
Such an insightful and astute question. I would not expect anything less from John Burgess. Here's the secret. Talk. Have the hard conversation. So, yes, write an advance directive with a dementia rider. Very, very important. Good place to get that, by the way, is Compassionate Choices. Have a very good dementia rider website. So look at that. But the key thing is to use that. The advance directive, writing it out, what you want, use that as just a beginning point for talking. Because people, as you just were pointing out in your question, people change their minds. And you know, you know, they may say boldly when they're in their 50s, "No, I don't want to live. You know, let me die." But when they actually get to get that age, they may. And the way to capture that is in conversation. You know, so there should be periodic, episodic conversations between the person who's going to die, which is all of us, and their healthcare agent or their loved ones, you know, who is going to represent them and talk for them when they can no longer talk for themselves. Okay, that's a healthcare agent. And so then the healthcare agent can use their best judgment. So it's really, you know, the only way to deal with the situation you're describing is to have a loving family or a healthcare agent who know you so well that they can say, well, Dad would have wanted, Mum would have wanted, this is my best judgment as to what she would have wanted to have happen, you know. And I noticed, you know, she had changed her mind. I mean, back when she was 60, she said, don't let me, you know, don't let me survive into advanced dementia. But now she has advanced dementia. She looks pretty happy. I mean, and she talked to me the other day. You know, I mean, you know, all you can do is inform your healthcare agent or whoever's representing you, to do the best job possible. And that only happens through these hard conversations. I call them hard. That's what Atal Gawande calls them, because they are hard to have. You know, to sit down with a parent and say, I want to talk about your end of life can be tricky. And parents don't want to do it because they don't want to upset their children. Children don't want to do it because they don't want to upset their parents. And doctors don't want to do it because they don't want to admit any failure. No, you're not going to die. No, we'll keep giving you science, you know, experimental treatments. We'll keep sticking needles in you, and so doctors don't want to admit that either. So thank you for the question, John. Okay, so hospice, very, very important. You give up curative care. I should have said that. You know that. You give up curative care, and you go just to comfort care. The hospice takes care of you. It had teams of doctors, nurses, hospice trained volunteers, social workers, bereavement counselors. They have a whole team which then looks after you. Not only looks after you, the dying person, but looks after the family, and not only physically but spiritually and emotionally. So hospice is really a wonderful thing. Okay, any other questions on hospice? Okay, so let's go. How are we doing on time, Susan? Oh, good. Okay, so think of more questions. All of you. I want everybody to think of a question they have about end of life or dying or aging, anything like that. Okay, now, I tell you what. You've all been sitting here so patiently. So would everybody just stand up and have a little exercise? Just everybody stand up, please. Everybody stand up and put your hands above your head. Put your hands above your head. And then roll your shoulders. Oh, boy, that feels so good. Yeah, and then roll your neck like this. You can close your eyes if you want. Just roll your neck. Oh, because it's not good to sit down too much, is it? No. Okay, sit down, everybody. Okay. All right, and then I'm going to talk now about green burial. Oh my gosh, green burial. Put your hand up if you've heard the phrase before. Good. Oh, a lot of you. Okay, very, very good. And you know, so what green burial is, and by the way, the reason it's in my book, Achieving a Good Death, is because one way to achieve a good death is to dispose of your body. That is an infelicitous phrase, but that's what we call it in this business, body disposition, is to dispose of your body in a responsible way, one which is consistent with your values. All of you, I know, are strong, supportive of environmental protection, and so you don't want the last thing you do with your life to be an insult to the environment, to be polluting, to be energy intensive, to aggravate climate change. You don't want that, do you? Reed is a big environmental guy, and so he doesn't want to end his life insulting the earth. So green burial. Let me first contrast it with the way we normally do it, a conventional burial, which is with embalming, and you put in a heavy casket, and you bury it 6 feet down in a concrete vault, incredibly consumptive of resources, of wood, steel, cement, I'm pausing because I remember when Trump buried one of his wives, he spent $120,000 on a casket, and I was just astonished by the absurd extravagance of that. But even normal caskets can be expensive. I mean, a typical burial expense, as all of you know, is about $12,000. I mean, it's a big, and often more, but that's an average price. Okay, so going back to green burial, so conventional ways of body disposition are are embalming, burial, and all that, or fire cremation. I'm using fire to distinguish it from water cremation. Fire cremation. It's just incineration. It's what we know as cremation. I mean, okay, and that's very polluting too. Mercury from fillings goes up in the air and so on. Okay. Green burial. There are 3 types of green burial. Okay, one is the way we used to do it prior to the Civil War. A person dies, they're laid out in the thing, they may be washed and then put in a simple biodegradable casket, a wooden casket, taken down to the family cemetery and buried there. That's how we used to do it prior to the Civil War, and it's what we now call that is a green burial. Green burial, no embalming, everything's biodegradable. No heavy casket, no cement vault, all that stuff. So my wife Gail and I are going to be buried at Reflection Park. Put your hand up if you've heard of Reflection Park. Anybody? Okay, a few. So Reflection Park is just been licensed. I serve on the Maryland Office of Cemetery Affairs, and we have just licensed. Last week, we just licensed, it's taken about 3-4 years, licensed Reflection Park. It's only the second green burial ground in Maryland, the first one being Strunsey Ridge outside Baltimore. Reflection Park is only about 20 minutes from here. And it's a beautiful 40 acres of wild land. So my wife and I are going to be buried there. The cost would be under $5,000. So not only is green burial a better way for the earth and better for the environment, but it's cheaper. I mean, it's a lot more inexpensive than the usual ways of burying people. Okay, so green burial. Any questions on green burial? Yes, Susan.
In my experience, most people aren't ready to get a funeral organized till anywhere from at least a week to 10 days or several weeks. So if you're doing green burial, what happens to the body?
So you refrigerate it. You refrigerate it. You get. If you're doing a home funeral, you get ice chips and put it around the body to slow the decomposing. And you get help if it's going to be 10 days. You get help from a funeral home, because after 3 days, it's best for the funeral to come and refrigerate the body. I remember when my twin brother John died about 2 years ago. His daughter went to see him about 3.5 weeks after he died, and they put him in a freezer and they brought him out. It was astonishing to me that they could do that. They could keep him in a freezer and he wouldn't. That I think stops decomposition. Okay, so yes. Oh, this is everybody. This is Eric Cathcart.
It's great to see you, Chris. Thank you so much for this gift of your book. I'm getting through it, and I encourage. Yeah, where is it? He's got it. Yeah, I'm right here. I created a green burial company. So this is a new venture for me, and I've also been in memorialization. So I just wanted to also point out that there's other different ways to approach green burial. I would encourage anybody to visit the garden at the cathedral. They have an All Souls cemetery, if you will, and it's internment of cremated remains, and it's a natural way of going, another option. So I just wanted to point that out. But thank you so much for this gift of your book.
Thanks, Eric. That's everybody. That's Eric Cathcart, great guy. Yes. Oh, good questions. Okay. Here. Okay. Here you go.
What about water cremation?
Yes, I'll talk about it. Very good.
And I wanted to know, are all undertakers prepared to work with green burials?
Very good. Okay, so I'll answer the second question first. Are all undertakers prepared to work with green burials? No, they are extraordinarily ignorant. I went up the other day to visit, my wife and I went up to visit Pumphrey Funeral Home. Some of you may know it, just on Wisconsin Avenue. And I asked about green burials, and they knew nothing about it. What is that, they said to me. I couldn't believe it, that a mortuary, a funeral home, wouldn't be intimately familiar with this new way of burying people. So the answer is not as much as they should be. You'd be astonished at their ignorance. I couldn't believe it. And your water. Okay, so there are water cremation. So we talk about green burial, where you take the body and just put it in the earth, about 3.5 feet down, with a lot of microbial decomposition and microbial action. Okay, so that's green burial. Now there are two other ways of disposing of bodies which are better than the conventional ways of embalming and burial or fire cremation. They are water cremation, also called alkaline hydrolysis, and the second way is natural organic reduction, NOR, or human composting. Both these ways of body disposition have become legal in Maryland. I fought hard with other people to lobby it hard to get these to become legal. And just a few weeks ago, Governor Moore signed the legislation which made them legal in Maryland for the first time: water cremation and human composting. In water cremation, you put the body in a capsule or tube or chamber, stainless steel chamber. You surround it with a 5% alkali solution. And in about 14 hours, it mimics what happens in real life. The body decomposes, leaving a brittle skeleton, which is then, as with fire cremation, there's an instrument called a cremulator, which takes the bones and crushes them. This is what happens in fire cremation too. People often don't know this, but the bones are crushed with a cremulator, and you get ash. You get ash from water cremation, not dissimilar from you get from fire cremation. But with water cremation, you have all that water, but in that water are peptides and amino acids and soaps and salts, and that can be discharged harmlessly. It's sterile. It can be discharged harmlessly into the municipal waste system. It's a very gentle, fire incineration is fierce. That's 1,600 degrees Fahrenheit. I mean, it's really fierce. But water cremation is a gentler, water-based way of disposing of bodies. Highly recommended. Desmond Tutu the famous bishop, chose to do this when he died, to dispose of his body. Why? Because he was he fought hard to fight climate disruption, and so he wanted his body disposed of in a responsible way which didn't aggravate the climate issue. Okay, so that's water cremation. And the other way is NOR, natural organic reduction, or human composting. This is where you take the body and you surround it with alfalfa and wood chips and straw. You put it in a stainless steel chamber. It revolves very slowly, and over 4 to 6 weeks, the body decomposes, and you're left with a cubic yard, which is a lot, a cubic yard of fertile soil, which you can use for putting under trees or plants, and it's beautiful, soil. If there are bone fragments, they can be, a cremulator can just deal with those. You had a question?
Joyce Nolan. Are there places in this area that do water cremation and the human decomposition?
Right. No. It hasn't been legal until Governor Westmore just signed this legislation. Now it's become legal. Now entrepreneurs and business people are beginning to develop the structures, the processes for doing it. So I think we will, within the next 5 years, I think we will find that there are places where we can have water cremation and NOR, human composting, in Maryland. But in the meantime, you can just, the nearest place at the moment now for water cremation is North Carolina. And there's one in Vermont. So it's not easy at the moment, but it's coming. It's coming. Yeah.
If we live in the district, can we have water cremation in Maryland and the remains brought back here?
I think the answer is yes, but we're at an early stage. The DC doesn't have any water way to have to cremate a body with alkaline hydrolysis, but that's gonna come. But I think you can, if Maryland does develop those facilities, then I think somebody in DC could send it, could go have the body taken out there, and then their remains coming back. Yeah. Who else has? Yes, yeah.
My husband and I have arranged for green burial at Congressional Cemetery, and we went to Gawler's to try to get help, and they had no idea, but they had a subsidiary that did. And just one more thing, Congressional Cemetery is really a beautiful place. It's being established as a national arboretum. They have fun events at Halloween, and so we go there sometimes for fun events. And
yeah, it's a great place. A friend of mine runs it. It's a great place. To your first point, you mentioned Gawler's. Some of you may have read Jessica Mitford's famous book, The American Way of Death. Anyone read that? Put your hand up. Anybody? Yeah. It's a witty, brilliant, funny book where she excoriates the funeral industry for being greedy and avaricious and for manipulating grieving people to give more money. But in that book, she has a chapter which talks about the Kennedy brothers and Gawler's, and she lays out the evidence for how the Gawler's cheated the two brothers who were assassinated, Robert and Jack, and it's just an extraordinary documentation of how the family, even the Kennedys, as sophisticated and powerful as they are, were ripped off by the Gawler's, by Gawler's funeral home. Yeah, and so your story about Gawler's does not surprise me. I'm a sworn enemy of the Gawler's. So any other questions about? Oh yes, the question here. Yeah.
It's actually about going back to hospice. To hospice.
Oh yes, please.
Can you talk a little bit about the interplay between dementia and hospice and how that works?
Yes. So the question was, can I talk a little bit about the interconnection between dementia and hospice? Yeah. Dementia is a agonizing disease, and it, as all of you know all this already. I mean, it can take 10 or 12 years to go from mild cognitive decline to severe dementia. It's a terrible problem, and then now we have about 7.5 million people in this country, but that number is going to balloon, it's all of us are wrestling with how to deal with it. And the first thing, and I'll come to hospice in a second, but the first thing to do is in your advance directives, and all of you should have an advance directive. The shocking statistic is that only 40% of people have an advance directive, and that should be up to 100%. And in communities of color, the figure is more like 20%. And this is terrible. So we need to do advance directives, and then we need to have a dementia rider added to that advance directive, so our loved ones know what we want to do if we get dementia, how we want to be treated. So what it basically is that when you have mild dementia, you might say, well, I want to everything done to prolong my life. Okay. Then, as I get to moderate dementia, then, well, hang on, not everything. I mean, yes, give me antibiotic if I get pneumonia, but don't go overboard. And then when I have advanced dementia, here is where I want you to give me comfort care. And if I get pneumonia, let me die. Don't give me an antibiotic. Let me die naturally. Give me morphine for breath, shortness of breath and things like that. But so you want to lay this out so your healthcare agent, your loved ones, know what you want. Now we've got a hospice. I mean, I'm not sure I can add much more. Hospice. We have lots of patients with dementia and is advanced dementia because it's a long, painful, slow disease, and so by the time they get to hospice, they're in really bad shape, and so we just do our best to look after them. It's not yeah.
Well, one question on top of that, Chris, how do you know, particularly in a case of dementia, when the right time is for hospice? Because it's a very slow process, and they don't want people sitting there for 12 years. And then, since you were talking a little bit about your work in the General Assembly, legislation to allow assisted suicide has been in front of Maryland for a long time without much progress. Could you comment on that?
Yes. So on the first, I'll talk about medical aid in dying in just 1 second, but the first question was, what was it, how you, to go to hospice, a doctor needs to ascertain that you have less than 6 months to live. And so a doctor looking at a dementia patient may say, you don't have it, you're not ready for hospice, but eventually they'll get to that point. And we know there are, Jimmy Carter, Art Buchwald, these people, these amazing people, are on hospice for 100, a year and a half. But that's very exceptional. I mean, most people in Montgomery Hospice where I work, most people die within 10 days of coming to hospice. I wish doctors were better about us saying to people, look, we want you, it's time to go to hospice. But doctors don't like to do that because they don't like admitting failure, and also they don't like to use the hospice because hospice sounds like, to many people, hospice sounds like you're giving up and you're admitting you're going to die. But the important thing about hospice is to recognize it's a way of living fully until the end. Yes, you do admit you are going to die, but you don't give up on life. Quite the reverse. And in fact, I'll tell you something extraordinary. Atul Gawande points this out in Being Mortal, that people on hospice can live longer. This is amazing. It's a paradox. They can live longer than if they had stayed on curative care and had surgery and radiation and chemo, all that stuff, and with all the uncomfortable side effects of those processes, they live shorter lives than if they were in. Yes, Susan. Oh, then I come to your medical aid dying.
Oh, he had another question.
Okay, so medical aid in dying, Reed called it assisted suicide, but we don't like to use the word suicide because a young person dies by their own hand, suicide. But for an old person coming to the end of their life, where they only have a few weeks left or a few months left, to call that suicide is, we think, in the Right to Die movement, we think that is an inappropriate use of the word. So we use medical aid in dying. And as Reed just pointed out, it just failed. That's about 2 or 3 times now it's failed by just one vote. I'm a strong advocate of it, as I know Susan is. But there may be people here who find that issue fraught and may not agree with it at all. The Catholic Church is famous for its opposition to medical aid in dying. But what medical aid in dying is, in case any of you are wondering, is where you take a lethal dose of drugs to hasten your death. So if you're living with unbearable pain and you only have a short time left, it's a way of taking control, of having agency, patient agency, body autonomy, and saying I'm going to take these lethal drugs. You have to do it. You have to self-digest, self-administer. Nobody can do it for you, and you have to be terminal. So you have to be 6 months of dying. So there are all sorts of barriers you have to overcome to get it. But I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing to give people choices at the end of life. A choice to die naturally, to let the disease take its natural course, or to give them a choice to hasten death, if that's what they would prefer to do, or to do voluntarily stopping eating and drinking, or to stop sustaining life treatments. I mean, all these are different ways of hastening your death. I discuss them all in great detail in the book. But all these are ways of hastening death if you want it. Did I answer your question? Oh, is it going to get passed? Yes. I'm sure it will. In the next 5 years, it will become law. Medical aid in dying will become law in Maryland, and yeah. There's a question about that.
Oh, you kind of just covered it, but medical aid in dying is for legal in the district and hopefully in Maryland for people who are of sound mind. If you're not, and because of dementia, and you do want to shorten your life because the advanced stages of dementia, many people would say there's not a quality of life worth maintaining. The legal recourse is stopping of eating and drinking. The problem is that has to be written in a directive while you're of sound mind, And if it is, hospice will honor it, and they will support a family as a person is nearing the end of his life, and through sedation to help them, keep them from wanting to get up and make a sandwich. That will help get to the place where they stop eating and drinking. But it doesn't work if you haven't written it out and specified while you are still of sound mind that you want that to happen. And you've got about
3-4 minutes. So thank you, Susan. Thank you for saying that. And when you choose to go to hospice, someone had a question. I can bring the microphone back. When you choose to go to hospice, very important to ask them what their values are. When you're looking ahead, looking for a hospice for a loved one or for yourself, you want to interview them and ask them very good questions. And in my book, I explain how to do that, because you want to make sure the hospice, as Susan just said, will support your views. I mean, you don't want to go to a hospice and say, I decide to do voluntarily stopping eating and drinking, or VSAD, and they say, oh, sorry, we don't support that here. I mean, you want a hospice that is going to support what you want to do. Someone had a question back here. Yes.
Cynthia Cathcart. Not really a question, but my father, who is 97, is in the ANOVA healthcare network, right? That's where his doctor is. And he had a bad fall about a month ago. And I took him to the emergency room, but I also brought with me his advance directive and his DNR. And the emergency room doctor congratulated me. She was like, oh, good, you already have this. And she took it and had it scanned into the hospital's situation. So something to think about is provide that to healthcare before you need it.
Yes. Thank you so much. That's an excellent point. Yes, you want to have, it's called a MOST form. You want to, if you have a serious disease, you want to have a MOST, and you want to talk about it with your doctor. It's a medical document signed by your doctor, and in there it'll say whether you want to have DNR or AND and allow natural death. Okay, we got to be quick here.
Just a quick comment. We had an elderly family member well into her 90s who was declining, losing weight. She did not have anything terminal. And there is a way to qualify for hospice if you are having failure to thrive.
Yes. Yep. Very, very good. Thank you. Thank you. Someone had it. Yeah.
Do you address feeding tubes in your book?
Yes, I do. Yes. My mother was on a feeding tube in a nursing home for 4 years. It's dreadful. A peg feed, where the food goes right through a tube in your stomach. Yeah, it's the whole question of feeding older people is fraught, because you don't want to force. I mean, it's very tempting if you have a loved one who's dying and they're not eating well. You think, oh, give them some food, give them some chicken soup, but this can not be good for people who are dying. Your body is shutting down. You don't really want to eat and drink, and so peg feeds are very. I have put in my dying will that I do not want a peg feed, and if I have one, to remove it. Okay, we're almost out of time. Anybody else have any other quick? What's that? Oh, the book. Oh, I bought some books. And if anybody would like to buy one, I'll happily sign it. They'll be out on the table. And we have also some of Susan's books too. So there's the table right outside, and I'll sit there and happily sign a book. The books cost $30. All the proceeds go to scholarships, student scholarships at American University, where I used to teach. Thank you all so much for having me today.
Thank you, Chris. I'll join you out at the table at least till the next service starts at 11:15, but thank you all.